This is also a time of change for my family.
Queen Camilla believed the Windsor Private Collection represented more than royal wealth. To her, it was proof that she had finally secured a permanent place inside the monarchy. But behind a closed door, 3 solicitors opened a sealed inheritance file and delivered a verdict that shattered that belief. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had been legally designated as the collection's sole future custodian. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla did not move when the senior solicitor finished reading. She removed her glasses, held them in her hands, and asked whether the wording could be challenged. The Windsor Private Collection, the family's personal archive of heirloom jewelry, handwritten letters, ceremonial objects, portraits, and treasures never intended for public display, had now been placed beyond her control. The decision was precise. Catherine would inherit full custodianship, meaning she alone would hold the duty to protect, approve, and eventually pass on the collection. Charles remained beside her, yet the king offered no defense. His silence cut deeper than the solicitor's words, because Camilla had expected him to resist, question, or demand time. Instead, he stared at the sealed file, as though duty had trapped him between his wife and the direct line of succession, the family branch through which the crown passes from monarch to heir. She turned toward him, searching for reassurance, but he lowered his eyes. The senior solicitor then opened the final page and pointed to an older royal signature. A binding clause stated that the collection must remain tied to the direct line, never to the reigning monarch's spouse. That single sentence stripped Camilla of ownership, authority, and any power to shape where the treasures would go. Catherine had not requested the inheritance. She had not even been told. William learned minutes earlier, when a call summoned his wife to Windsor, without explanation. Camilla reached for the document, placed it flat on the table, and pressed one finger against Catherine's name. "So this was settled before I was ever asked," she said quietly. Charles finally looked at her, but the monarch still could not find words strong enough to answer the humiliation in her voice. Then Camilla saw something the solicitors had not mentioned. A handwritten amendment had been attached beneath the signature, and the initials at the bottom were painfully familiar. She recognized them at once. Someone she trusted had helped secure Catherine's inheritance long before this meeting began. But the inheritance was not simply transferring a collection. It was exposing what Catherine, Camilla, Charles, and William each believed their place inside the royal family was truly worth. The legal announcement placed 2 royal women on opposite sides of an inheritance neither could discuss publicly. Catherine saw a responsibility she had never requested. Camilla saw a final rejection she could never erase. Between them stood King Charles and Prince William, 2 men now forced to decide whether protecting the monarchy meant protecting the women they loved, or accepting a verdict written long before that morning. Catherine entered the Windsor Library expecting a routine briefing, but stopped the moment she saw William waiting beside a locked presentation case. His face carried none of the calm he usually used during official meetings. The prince stepped toward her, placed the solicitor's file on the table, and told her the decision was already legally binding. She opened it slowly, then read the same sentence twice. Her role was custodial rather than financial. Custodianship meant she would not simply possess the collection, she would be responsible for preserving every item, recording its history, approving its use, and eventually passing it intact to the next generation. That distinction mattered, because Windsor's private treasures were not ordinary wealth. They carried family memory, royal duty, and the authority to decide who could touch the past. Camilla understood that power more clearly than anyone. For years, the Queen Consort had supported heritage restorations, attended archive briefings, and taken a personal interest in objects linked to earlier royal women. She had privately believed that such service would earn her lasting influence over the collection. Now Catherine's appointment told her that loyalty beside the king could still be separated from succession. Catherine closed the file without signing the acknowledgement page. She looked directly at William and asked, "Did your father know this was coming?" He hesitated before answering. Charles had known that the legal review was underway, but the monarch had not told them how far it had gone. That silence made the future king suspicious. The timing felt too precise, the authority too broad. William then pointed to a second page. Catherine's designation gave her control over access, loans, restoration, and ceremonial use. Any request involving the collection would eventually pass through her office. She whispered that she did not want the inheritance to become another wound inside the family. He replied that refusing it might dishonor whoever had fought to protect it. Elsewhere, Charles admitted during a private recorded conversation with his legal advisor that Camilla had once asked whether several pieces could eventually be associated with her own branch of the family. The king had never answered her clearly. Then a message arrived. Camilla wanted to meet Catherine alone before the palace made any announcement. She insisted that one question had to be answered face to face. Before Catherine could answer Camilla's demand, the solicitors uncovered the private incident that had made this inheritance unavoidable. The decision had not begun with a solicitor's letter or a sudden palace argument. It began 11 months earlier during a private Windsor inventory when a single request transformed quiet discomfort into irreversible action. That evening, a velvet case was opened, an heirloom was removed, and one conversation convinced the collection's legal protector that its future could no longer remain undefined. Camilla had entered the room expecting a controlled review of family treasures. Only 5 people were present, yet the queen consort understood that every word carried weight. For years, the Windsor Private Collection had been managed through tradition, quiet agreements, and restricted family understandings, rather than one public inheritance plan. That uncertainty mattered, because no one could say with complete authority who would control the collection after Charles. A senior royal trustee had warned the king more than once. A trustee is the person legally responsible for protecting property on behalf of others, and this official had repeatedly told the monarch that silence would create a future conflict between his wife and the direct heirs. Charles listened, delayed, and hoped family loyalty would hold. It did not. Camilla reached toward the open case and lifted the Queen Mother's sapphire and pearl necklace. She then asked whether it could be permanently reassigned for her granddaughter to wear at a future family wedding. The request was calm, almost casual, but Princess Anne understood its deeper meaning. A permanent reassignment would remove the piece from the shared royal collection and attach it to another branch of the family. Anne moved immediately. She placed both hands over the open jewelry case, lowered the lid, and said, "Until this is settled, nothing leaves this room." Camilla froze. The Princess Royal had spoken as a family witness, meaning she was present to confirm what happened and protect the integrity of the process. Yet the Queen heard something more personal. She heard rejection. Camilla accused Anne of treating her as temporary, despite years of standing beside Charles. She reminded her of every heritage project she had supported, and every duty she had carried. Anne did not soften. She answered that service could earn respect, but it could not quietly rewrite ownership. The confrontation ended, but the real decision began afterward. Anne met the collection's legal trustee alone, without Charles or Camilla, and demanded that the future line of custodianship be settled in writing. A documented account of that meeting later confirmed that she witnessed the amendment naming Catherine as the future custodian. Those were the initials Camilla had recognized beneath the inheritance clause. Anne had helped seal the decision long before the solicitors opened the file. Armed with the truth about Anne's intervention, Camilla entered her meeting with Catherine carrying grief, anger, and one accusation she could no longer contain. There were no aides inside the Windsor morning room when Camilla and Catherine met. No solicitors, no husbands, and no palace officials stood between them. On the table lay the inheritance file that had altered both of their futures. Camilla did not begin with congratulations. She looked at Catherine, pushed the document across the polished surface, and asked whether she had known all along. Catherine held her gaze and answered carefully. She had agreed to meet alone because witnesses would turn family pain into an official dispute, and neither woman needed another layer of palace control. Camilla had demanded the meeting before any public announcement for the opposite reason. She refused to discover Catherine's intentions through lawyers, secretaries, or carefully written statements designed to hide what people truly felt. Camilla leaned forward. She accused Catherine of benefiting from a system that praised patience while quietly moving power toward the direct succession. The direct succession meant the line through which the crown passes from one monarch to the next, and in that structure, spouses could stand beside power without ever owning its future. To the queen consort, that difference now felt brutal. Catherine did not retreat. She said she had never requested the collection, never influenced the solicitors, and never asked Anne to sign anything. The Princess of Wales refused to apologize for a decision she had not designed and had not anticipated. Yet her voice softened when she admitted that she understood why the verdict felt personal. Camilla answered that understanding meant little when one woman gained authority and the other had to ask permission. Then Camilla revealed what Charles had once told her during a recorded private conversation at Clarence's house. The king had suggested she would retain ceremonial access to several pieces for the rest of her life. She had trusted that promise because it came from her husband, not from an advisor. Catherine listened, then opened the legal document and pointed to the access clause. Custodianship gave Catherine final approval over loans, restoration, and ceremonial use. Camilla could still request certain pieces, but every request would pass through the future custodian. The queen consort stared at the page as the full meaning settled over her. Charles had offered reassurance, but the law had placed the final decision elsewhere. Camilla pushed her chair backwards and stood. "Would you ever deny me?" she asked. Catherine paused. That silence carried more weight than a refusal. She placed her palm over the unsigned acceptance page and said, "I will protect the collection, even when protection becomes personal." One disputed heirloom already threatened to test that promise. The confrontation ended without reconciliation, and the unanswered question of who truly controlled the inheritance moved directly toward the one royal who had helped write its fate. The solicitors had delivered the verdict, but they had not created it. The decisive power came from a private amendment witnessed by Princess Anne, a woman who viewed the collection not as decoration, wealth, or reward, but as a chain of memory that could be broken by one emotional concession. Now Camilla wanted an explanation, and Anne had no intention of softening the truth. Camilla entered the narrow private office without waiting to be announced. She placed the copied amendment on the desk and asked why years of loyalty beside Charles had counted for so little when the collection's future was decided. Anne looked at the page but did not touch it. The queen consort wanted anger, apology, perhaps even regret. Instead, she received control. Anne's role had never made her the owner. She had acted as a formal witness and family guardian, meaning her signature confirmed that the amendment had been properly agreed and protected from later denial. A senior trustee had supported the change, and the legal principle behind it was simple. Custodianship should move toward the household of the future sovereign, the royal family built around the person expected to inherit the crown. Camilla pressed harder. She asked whether marriage, duty, and years of public service meant nothing once bloodline and succession entered the room. Anne answered that those years had earned her a place beside the king, but not the right to redirect objects meant for generations not yet born. The words landed without cruelty, yet they felt merciless. Then Anne removed her spectacles and folded them beside the signed amendment. "I did not sign against you," she said. "I signed for what comes after all of us." Camilla stared at her. The Princess Royal had carried the blame, but something in her voice suggested the decision had not been hidden from everyone. She demanded the full truth. Anne gave it through a documented account of the final legal meeting. Charles had been informed that an amendment was being prepared. The king knew the collection would be placed under one future custodian. He was offered the chance to review the final name and deliberately declined. Camilla's anger changed direction. The monarch had feared that personally choosing either his wife or Catherine would split the family beyond repair. So he had allowed legal tradition to decide, hoping distance would protect him from the consequences. Anne called it restraint. Camilla heard cowardice. She picked up the amendment and moved toward the door. Anne warned her that confronting Charles would not change the inheritance. The queen consort answered that she no longer wanted the collection changed. She wanted to know why her husband had known the danger was coming and left her alone to face it. For Camilla, the inheritance was no longer a dispute with Catherine or Anne. It had become evidence that Charles had protected himself while leaving her to absorb the loss. Within hours, the decision began changing palace behavior. Access codes were reviewed. Inventory briefings were redirected. Staff who once sought Camilla's approval were instructed to wait for Catherine's office. Nothing dramatic was announced in the corridors, yet every altered procedure carried the same message. The future had arrived early, and Camilla's influence over Windsor's private legacy had already begun to disappear. Camilla noticed the missing folder before breakfast. The collection briefing had appeared on her schedule for years, always placed beneath state correspondence and ceremonial notes. Now the space was empty. She rang for her private secretary and asked where it had gone. The answer came carefully. New confidential instructions required every collection-related decision to be prepared for Catherine's eventual custodianship. The change did not remove Camilla's title or public position. She remained queen beside Charles, with all the ceremony and public duty that role carried. Yet custodianship meant legal responsibility for protecting, lending, restoring, and approving the use of private royal heritage. By separating that authority from her title, the palace had drawn a hard line between standing beside the monarch and controlling what would survive beyond his reign. Camilla dismissed the secretary, closed the door, and sat alone. The silence felt heavier than the solicitor's verdict, because this was no longer one document on a table. It had entered her mornings, her schedule, and the behavior of people who had once waited for her approval. Charles found her there later. The king tried to reassure her that she remained his queen, and that no legal arrangement could change what she meant beside him. She looked at him, and answered that the institution was already preparing for a world in which his promises would no longer matter. He had no easy reply. The inheritance had become daily proof of the choice he had refused to make. Then another problem arrived. A diamond brooch linked to the collection had already been selected for an upcoming state reception, a formal event held to honor an important national or foreign guest. Camilla had worn it before, but the new rules required Catherine's approval. Catherine received the request through a documented palace memorandum. She authorized the brooch immediately, yet added one condition: it had to be returned to the secure collection chamber before midnight after the reception. The decision showed respect, but it also revealed unmistakable control. Camilla could still wear the piece. She could no longer assume it was hers to command. Charles understood the danger. He sent Catherine a private message, asking for a meeting without advisors, hoping she could protect the collection without destroying what remained of his marriage. Charles could no longer hide behind signatures and solicitors, and his private appeal to Catherine would force both of them to decide whether peace was still possible without weakening the inheritance. Charles met Catherine without secretaries, legal advisors, or even William. For the first time since the decision, the king spoke not as sovereign, but as a husband who feared that one inheritance had exposed every weakness in his family. Catherine listened without interrupting. Then Charles asked her to make a concession the law did not require, but compassion might. Charles knew he could not overturn the arrangement without consequences. A formal legal challenge would mean asking the solicitors to reopen a binding decision, and that could expose the private dispute to the public. It would also suggest that the monarch was willing to weaken a future inheritance simply to ease pressure inside his marriage. The king had delayed too long already. Now every choice carried a cost. Catherine held real discretion over lifetime ceremonial access. That meant she could allow selected pieces to be worn at official events without surrendering ownership or changing who would inherit them. The Princess of Wales understood why that mattered. She could protect the collection for the next generation while still treating Camilla with dignity in the present. Charles placed his signet ring on the desk. The ring, which carries the sovereign's personal seal and symbolizes his authority, seemed suddenly heavier than the words he had avoided. "I thought silence would prevent division," he admitted. Catherine answered without raising her voice. Silence only delayed the moment everyone discovered it. The king looked away. He confessed that he had refused to read the final designation, because choosing between Camilla and the direct line would have made him responsible for someone's pain. Catherine told him that refusing to choose had still been a choice. His wife now felt abandoned because he had allowed solicitors, signatures, and sealed clauses to say what he would not. Then Charles made his request. He asked Catherine to guarantee Camilla continued access to a small group of pieces that carried deep personal meaning during his lifetime. He did not ask for ownership. He did not ask for transfer. He asked only that the queen consort not be made to feel erased while standing beside him. Catherine considered the request carefully. Compassion pulled her toward agreement, but duty demanded limits. She accepted on 3 conditions. Every item would remain part of the Windsor Private Collection. Each piece would return immediately after use, and nothing could be reassigned to Camilla's descendants. Charles agreed. The arrangement protected his wife's dignity, but not the private legacy she had once hoped to create. He rose slowly, knowing he now had to tell Camilla that Catherine had shown mercy without surrendering control. The private agreement gave Camilla respect without control, but once the decision reached the public, its meaning would be interpreted far beyond the walls of Windsor. By sunrise, the inheritance was no longer a private Windsor matter. It had become a national symbol of where the monarchy believed its future belonged. Broadcasters spoke of continuity. Newspapers spoke of rejection. Outside the palace gates, supporters debated whether Catherine had been honored or burdened, while one front page reduced Camilla's private devastation to 5 merciless words. Catherine watched the morning coverage beside William in silence. The palace had issued a controlled statement confirming her future custodianship and describing the transfer as an act of generational continuity. Custodianship meant legal responsibility for protecting, lending, restoring, and eventually passing the collection forward. The statement sounded calm, but the public understood its deeper meaning immediately. Windsor's private legacy had been placed with the future sovereign's household. William listened as commentators praised the decision. The prince knew why that language mattered. It showed confidence in Catherine, strengthened the direct line, and told the country that the monarchy was preparing carefully for what came next. Yet every word of praise also made Camilla's exclusion more visible. Catherine's expression tightened when one broadcaster emphasized that the collection included jewels once worn by Diana. The comparison was instant and brutal. A story about legal inheritance became a story about past and future royal women, and the Princess of Wales knew the public would now treat her appointment as a victory over someone she had never wanted to defeat. William turned off the television after the commentator called her the keeper of the monarchy's memory. Catherine looked at him and said, "They are celebrating something that has hurt someone." He reminded her that compassion did not make the decision wrong. She answered that correctness did not make the pain disappear. Camilla felt that pain before breakfast. The Queen refused her tray and asked that every newspaper be removed, but one front page had already been placed beside it. The headline read, "Catherine inherits, Camilla excluded." She stared at those words longer than she intended. Her private loss had become public judgment. Outside Windsor Castle, a small crowd gathered beneath umbrellas as a newspaper vendor lifted the same front page above his head. Some people called the decision fair. Others called it cruel. Then one woman near the gate quietly said, "The crown has chosen its future." The sentence passed through the crowd because it captured what official language had tried to soften. Charles saw the reaction through a documented morning briefing. The king understood that silence would now look like division. He decided the family had to appear together, not to deny the conflict, but to prove the inheritance would not become an open royal war. The final answer would not come from the newspapers, the solicitors, or the crowd. It would come from how Camilla and Catherine chose to stand before one another after everything had been exposed. The inheritance could not be reversed, and the pain it caused could not be erased. Yet the monarchy's final verdict would not be defined by who held the legal document. It would be defined by what happened when Catherine opened the collection chamber as its future custodian and invited Camilla to enter, not as its owner, but as a woman whose place in the family would no longer depend on possession. Catherine signed the custodial acceptance without celebration. The document confirmed that the Windsor Private Collection would remain intact and pass through the direct line of succession, the family path through which the crown moves from one monarch to the next. Her signature did not make the treasures personal wealth. It made her responsible for protecting them, recording their history, and carrying them safely toward the next generation. Charles approved the separate lifetime ceremonial access arrangement. That agreement allowed Camilla to continue wearing selected pieces at official events, but it gave her no power to transfer, divide, or permanently reassign them. The king understood the balance at last. His wife would keep dignity in the present, while Catherine would protect the inheritance beyond his reign. Camilla entered the collection chamber beside Catherine and stopped near the velvet case that had begun the conflict. She admitted that her devastation had never been about one necklace or one legal clause. The queen consort had feared the monarchy saw every year beside Charles as temporary, as though her service could disappear the moment his reign ended. Catherine listened, then answered with quiet certainty. The collection could not prove a marriage mattered, erase a reign, or measure a lifetime of service. It could only preserve what had been entrusted to those who came next. The Princess of Wales then handed Camilla the written access agreement herself, rather than sending it through solicitors. That simple choice restored the human dignity the legal process had taken away. Camilla read every condition. She did not argue. She accepted the agreement, withdrew any challenge, and acknowledged Catherine as the collection's rightful future custodian. Then she touched the closed velvet case but did not open it. She turned toward her and said, "Keep it together." Catherine answered, "I will." Charles later learned of the exchange through a documented private account and understood the truth he had avoided. Peace had come only after the two women faced the pain directly. Catherine emerged not as a winner, but as a guardian. Camilla emerged not as an owner, but as someone strong enough to stop personal loss from becoming institutional destruction. The inheritance did not prove that Camilla had never belonged. It proved that belonging and succession were not the same thing. Catherine inherited Windsor's private treasures because her duty pointed forward. Camilla retained her dignity because she chose not to tear the collection, or the family, apart. And with that quiet exchange, the Windsor Private Collection passed into Catherine's future, while Camilla finally accepted that her royal legacy would be measured not by what she possessed, but by what she allowed the monarchy to preserve. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.